What is mindfulness? What are the benefits of practicing it? How can we use mindfulness to help us deal with the stresses of life with more peace and even joy? If you're interested, you can listen to the following discussion between myself and fellow therapist Ms. Deidre Eberhart. In our discussion, we share personal stories and examples of how mindfulness has improved the quality of our lives. Hi everyone, this is David Lisson. Welcome back to the channel. In case you don't know me, I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of New York, a life coach, and a meditation and mindfulness instructor. So as I just mentioned, this video is a discussion between myself and Deirdre, and it's more of a personal sharing about our experiences with the practice of mindfulness. This is not a systematic presentation of what is mindfulness, what are the methods. It's just more of a personal sharing. In the future, I hope to do more videos and content about mindfulness, about how to practice it, about how to use it in your daily life. But for now, this is just a personal sharing to help encourage you to look into mindfulness. Because I believe that and experience that mindfulness can benefit everyone, regardless of religion or cultural background. Mindfulness is just the practice of being fully aware of ourselves in the present moment. If we're fully aware of what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, we could then respond to situations more skillfully. We can deal with people and situations with more wisdom and more compassion. So without further ado, I'll present to you the discussion. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'd be happy to reply. So let's listen in together. Thank you so much for taking the time to have the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think this is not only fun for me, but I think, my intention of inviting you is to present mindfulness to people so that they can hear what it's like from two people who try to live mindfully. Compared to just talking about it or teaching it, just to share more of what our experience is, with mindfulness and meditation practice. And try to present people something a bit more in depth, because there's so much out there which is just general information,
Yeah, and I think we have really different, probably very different experiences. So I think that could be helpful to so many people.
Yeah, definitely. So let me introduce you first. So everyone, this is Deidre Eberhart. So Deirdre is a mental health therapist, a mother of two, and you've been meditating for about 15 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's 2008. In your bio that you gave me, you said you love meditation, or you love sharing about meditation methods to help people reduce stress and anxiety and to make it more accessible, especially for people who really don't know where to start, because the world of meditation is enormous, right?
Mm.
You're also a co-coordinator for a Buddhist group in Binghamton, New York, called the Southern Tier Meditation Sangha. So that's a space, and I'm guessing it's a physical space, or is it an online group?
It is actually both. We meet every Mondays at 7:30, both online, so you can Zoom in, or you can come to the physical space where we have it in the upstairs of a church.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have a presenter, and sometimes it's peer led. So we do 24 minutes of meditation, and then afterwards we have a teaching, and then discussion, and yeah, and then we go from there. It's really nice to have a community in the area now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So it's a resource for you folks who are up there and in the Binghamton area, as well as folks who just want to sign in online. I'll put the contact information, if it's okay, in the description of the podcast later, so people could
Absolutely.
reach out.
Good.
And you told me you're a self-proclaimed mental health and wellness nerd. Spending your free time learning about all different kinds of methods and techniques to help people process trauma, deal with, you know, traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress, and all kinds of anxiety or depression issues. So it sounds like it's your profession, but it also sounds like it's something you love to do.
I really do. I I just love listening to audio recordings. I am 4 hours into a 27-hour long book right now,
Wow.
and I just started it yesterday, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I just I love to learn because I think that everybody needs something different. What works for one person is not going to work for the other, and so on and so on.
Right.
Everybody's so different. So if I bring up something, for example, in therapy, um, try this breathing method, or um, try this really practical method of, looking at it this way, it might not resonate with them. So I like to have, about 47 tricks up my sleeve so we don't run out.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Every person, may approach healing in a different way and need a different approach. So awesome. To introduce myself and then how we got connected. So I'm also a mental health counselor, psychotherapist, and I also do work as a life coach. Two very similar professions, but also not. I won't get into the differences, but there's quite a bit of overlap in that, these two roles are both working with people and helping people clarify, their values, clarify their life direction, and then make changes, helping a person make changes to their life that are in line with what they value. And a part of my work is also using mindfulness and meditation, which I learned as a Buddhist monk, which was my previous life, so to speak, which was actually, it's been about 8 years since leaving the monk's life and now um, doing a similar service as a therapist, as a coach. So I love doing this work. I love sharing, how to heal using meditation, mindful living, and just, making a connection with people, help them find clarity. Just to let people know how we met briefly, I think I was thinking back to when was it the first time that we met, and I think it was when I was still a monk at the retreat center, the Dharma Drum Retreat Center in upstate New York. I don't know if you remember it, but I think it was a 1 day retreat, and you and the folks from Binghamton came down to join it.
Yes, I remember that you said that was the most mindful I have ever. You are the most mindful group I've ever had, and I was like, oh, bet you guys, you bet you say that to everyone. I do, yeah, I do remember that mostly because it was my very first retreat.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I found the idea of a 1 day retreat to be really accessible to a newbie, which I was at that point.
Uh-huh. Wow, okay. So that was your first full day retreat. And I don't remember saying that to you guys, but I remember thinking to myself when you said something, I don't even remember what you said. We were just, it was like after the retreat finished, and it was you and the group of folks from your meditation group, and we were just chatting afterwards in the meditation hall. And I just remember my first impression of you was that you were very, very calm, and I don't know how to describe it. Like when you spoke, it was very well paced and it just seemed very clear. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but with all the people that I met and came to the center, you just had a way about you that was very calm and centered, and when you spoke, it was just very, very clear. That was my first impression of you.
Wow. Well, that means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So, although you were a newbie, maybe you had it in you already. Is it fair to say that your character before you even started this was a bit more calm and centered in general?
Um, no.
No, huh? Or were you just faking?
No,
Were you just faking it?
no, I wasn't faking it. Um, so this, if I could go into a little bit how I got into uh, mindfulness, it was because I wasn't centered.
Hmm.
And I remember having m- a panic attack in a classroom
Hmm.
at college, and I think it was partially because my best friend's mother um, was about to pass away. Um, what happened was very sudden to her, and in fact, um, even though I was up in college in Binghamton, my friend's mother is actually from Pine Bush,
Uh-huh.
so that's it's a different connection. But um, so I had a panic attack in this classroom. I had to leave, and it was a lecture hall. It was a lot of people that
Mm-hmm.
this happened in front of,
Right.
and I was going through existential anxieties of every kind that you can think of. And I came back into the classroom at the end, and I explained what happened to the teacher, and he was very nice. And he also happens to be a lay Buddhist teacher,
Uh-huh.
and I had been interested, and that's kind of the push that it pushed me into asking him, like, "Hey, are students allowed to go to this thing?" And he said, "Yes." So, and I remember saying, "Well, I just want to come to reduce my anxiety. I'm not really interested in the spiritual aspect of it. I just want to get my anxiety in check."
Mm-hmm.
And that summer, that's what I did. I spent 3 whole months just meditating and listening to the Dharma because I found some Dharma and then I just couldn't get enough of it. So I kind of accidentally became Buddhist.
Huh.
Um, and and you probably met me after I had that beginner's mind, and I was just soaking it up like a sponge.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get to a place where I was very calm. And it was a really stark contrast to who I was even 6 months or 8 months before that.
Hmm. Wow. So the time that I met you was about um 3 months after you started, or a few months after you started practicing?
Oh, I think it was cold out, maybe cool out. So if it was autumn, yeah, it was about 6 months after.
Okay.
But this is years ago, so I don't.
Mm-hmm.
There's no promises.
Yeah, yeah. In any case, it sounds like it was a transformed you from being, very anxious to the point of having a panic attack in class to feeling calm and centered by the time you were at that retreat.
Oh yes. In fact, I don't mind sharing this because I like to self-disclose when I think it's helpful. I
Mm.
was I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I had always had a racing mind from ever since I was a child.
Mm.
Um, if I didn't have something to worry about, I would worry that I was missing something. I would worry about not worrying.
Mm.
It's, very indicative of generalized anxiety disorder.
Uh-huh.
So, um, and all of the research that I read, mindfulness was a pretty darn good, um, I guess, remedy for that.
Right.
Yeah, because the medicines, they weren't working. I tried everything, and I thought, you know what? Let me just try this. And it set my life in a completely different direction.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Wow. I mean, your story is very interesting, and it's actually quite similar to mine, which um, I'll just share briefly. I also encountered meditation. Um, Initially, it wasn't Buddhist or it wasn't mindfulness meditation, but I was looking for something in my college years because of anxiety. I don't remember in college having panic attacks, but I was just kind of like on edge all the time. Um, Very similar to like what you're saying with worry. The first thing in the morning, after I woke up, I would start worrying about different things that I, were going to happen during the day or that I was planning for during the day. I could even remember some of the scenes that I was worrying about. It's kind of weird. Um, and it was mixed in with more of a social anxiety. So I'd wake up in the morning and think about like how I'd have to go and meet the group of people that I see every day on the way to class, and what would I say? What would I do? How would I feel? Would people think I'm weird or something? Right? Which is more this social piece of anxiety, which could be, I didn't get diagnosed at the time. During that time, um, mental health and therapy was not such a popular thing. But if I were to diagnose my former self, I would fit all the description of the requirements for generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we do have very, very similar stories when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And the same, with meditation, I found um, it was finally a chance to look at what was happening inside me and make changes to, what I was thinking, and even learn how to take a break from thinking and just enjoy sitting there, or enjoy walking to class instead of worrying about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, what I realized with meditation about worrying is yes, things will go wrong, but almost never in the specific way that you rehearse worrying about it.
Hmm. Right. Right. So basically, the object that we're worrying about, or the scene that we're worrying about, never happens.
Exactly. And if it does, so what? It was going to happen.
Yeah. But I think even on a deeper level, it could never happen because the things that we're worrying about are actually just images and an internal movie in our mind.
Yeah, and I think that's what meditation taught me. It's like how to focus on the present moment,
Mm.
right? There are so many different kinds of meditation, but the one that I happened to run into specifically was mindfulness since I was a psychology student and I thought, well, let me just see which kind of meditation is
Hmm.
the best, how can I best apply this? So mindfulness specifically, the coming out of your head and into your body, or out of your head, or focusing on the breath. And at first I thought, well, I can't do meditation. I wasn't raised with meditation. I can't sit still, right? All of the things that I hear so many people say, um, until somebody told me, like, you're not supposed to sit there and clear your mind. You haven't been meditating in a cave for 40 years, like, so get that out of your head.
Mm-hmm.
So just focus on the breath, and if you go away, so what? Come back and just keep doing that.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Before we get into methods, though, maybe we should just take a step back
Mm.
and define mindfulness, or share how you understand mindfulness, because there can be lots of people listening to this who've just never encountered it. Um, so can you do that? Can you share, like, how do you understand what it is? How would you
Sure.
define it?
Okay, so mindfulness, the way that I think of it is coming back to the present moment, not being in the past, not being in the future, coming back to the present and anchoring in something, whether it's the breath or something else, something that I can focus on so that I don't spiral into thoughts,
Hmm.
right? Not that I don't have them, but I notice them and then I come back.
Hmm. Okay, so when you say grounding yourself in the present moment, are you thinking about something? Like, how do we do that?
So focusing, for example, focusing on the weight of my body where I'm sitting down, noticing the physical sensations, noticing the breath going in and out, noticing the temperature of my hands.
Hmm.
So anything, yeah, I guess I'm thinking about just the different sensations.
Thinking about, or it sounds like you're attending to them or paying attention to them.
Yes, experiencing them.
Hmm. Okay, right. So compared to, let's say, compared to our normal or typical state of mind where we're distracted, or we're not so attentive to what we're doing, we're thinking about the past, we're planning for the future, we're looking at this, looking at that, maybe talking to someone, maybe listening to a podcast at the same time, as we're cooking, as we're cleaning, as we're driving. Maybe that would be the unmindful state of mind. It's trying to do many things at the same time, very scattered and with lots of distracted thinking. Is that fair to say that's an unmindful state?
I think so.
Okay. And so mindfulness, the way you described it, is kind of grounding our mind in the experience of, it sounds like you're describing sitting there. So the weight of your body as you're sitting, feeling of your body as you're sitting, your hands, or the breath. Is that right? Just directly experiencing, as opposed to this distracted attention.
Yeah, I think you describe it more accurately. It's experiencing. There's not so many thoughts. It's just focus. It's attention.
Hmm. Right. And like you said, thoughts happen. I think that's one misconception when people approach meditation or mindfulness. I hear them say that, I had thoughts happening, so, I wasn't doing it right. So I just kind of gave up because I couldn't stop my thoughts from happening. But as you said, it's thought, having thoughts is not the problem. Um, we all have thoughts. Having thoughts is not the problem. It's getting lost in them.
Yeah.
Lost in thinking about the past, which we could describe as like regret, right? Or lost in the future, which we could describe as anxiety.
So yeah, I think, and they could be equally as devastating to the mood.
Hmm. Right, right. So what happens when we're lost in the past or future, or even just distracted while we're attending to something in the present? Like, what happens to a person's mood?
Um, well, I think starting with the thoughts depends. Um, when a person goes into the past and they're going over and over and they're going over and over it in their mind. It's been my experience that for myself and for other people that they're almost trying to control it, like they can go back and change it if they think about it enough.
Hmm.
Um, or they're, they just can't stop thinking about it, about how they wish they could do it differently. And it's like just the anxiety goes up because you can't.
Hmm.
And in the future, it's almost again like trying to control it. It's like, well, if I think about it this way, maybe I can catch it.
Hmm.
Or if I prepare myself for this terrible thing that I know is going to happen to me, well, then maybe I won't be so surprised when it happens,
Hmm.
and at least I'll mitigate that, um, suffering.
Mm.
And even if it were to mitigate some of it, it's a whole lot of suffering that you invest to begin with, at a constant state, at a constant rate.
Right, right. I guess the word rumination describes that, right?
Yes.
Constantly thinking about either something in the past or future that we wish we could control, that we wish didn't happen. So that's kind of interesting, that we got to this point where distractedness or being lost in thoughts as as opposite to being mindful and fully present, a source of distractedness or a source of mindlessness sounds like wanting to be able to control things.
Right. And what's really interesting to me is that if you're in the present moment, I would bet you have more control over that than any of the other ones, to a limited point.
Right, right. At least we have, control over our behavior, how we respond.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how many problems are caused by not being in the moment, right? Not really listening to someone, not really understanding what's happening around. And then that causes more suffering in the future.
Hmm. Right, right. So all the time and energy that we invest in worrying about the future, wishing we can control it, we're actually damaging our present and every present that we experience.
Right. So if you're if you're worrying about the future, you're going to miss the present, which actually might, ruin things for the future.
Right. So the present and the future are becoming ruined because of our worry and ruminations. That's kind of bizarre if you think about it, huh?
Yeah.
And it
Um,
may come from a really good place, a really good intention, right? Not that we're trying to destroy our relationships or the quality of our life, but trying to control things and trying so bad to control things, outcomes, it's like we end up with a very poor quality of being. We're stressed. Our emotions are fluctuating, boiling. That is, like you said, a lot of suffering, even with good intention.
oh yeah, and even with these life lessons that I had, I guess considering pretty early in my life, um, it was very hard to do during the pandemic for me.
Mm,
Um, just such high stress. It really just overloaded me, to the point where it actually felt impossible sometimes to do this kind of meditation.
mm. What was that like?
Oh boy.
Mm, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I can go into that because I think people have really high amounts of stress no matter who you are at different points in your life. Um, so the pandemic started, um, 3 months after my second child was born.
Wow.
So I
Mm,
don't I don't know if you're familiar, but there's this, for some people, and myself included, I like to do like a self quarantine,
uh-huh.
for the first 3 months of life,
Hmm.
because you don't want your kid to get RSV or something else. So we stayed inside from, October until I guess of January, February, around there.
Uh-huh.
And so uh, we went out shopping once. We went to one restaurant, and then boom, pandemic came to the U.S.
Wow.
And so then we were in real quarantine.
Hmm.
And then it turns out my youngest had a heart problem.
Oh, wow.
And so she wouldn't eat because apparently that gives you migraines. So she wouldn't eat. She would scream hours and hours at a time. My husband had a surgery during this time, so he couldn't get up and help me.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so extreme sleep deprivation, I would get maybe 2 to 3 hours at a time.
Yeah.
And then I would be up for hours in between then. And sometimes it's just all I got. Um, so just really it was actual torture, right? That's what they do during torture is they sleep deprive you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds incredibly intense.
yeah. So the hierarchy of needs comes to mind.
Yeah, right? Okay.
Yeah. So when my needs were not being met, it didn't seem possible for me to do meditation because I was just in survival mode. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it wasn't during this time that I got to ask my teacher. My teacher is, is Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I got to ask him before he passed, what do you do when you have children? What do you do when you have children and you can't meditate? And so he asked me if I was nursing my child, and I said yes. So he said, just imagine that's the meditation, giving food to your child.
Mm.
Um, so the one kind of sort of mindfulness that I did bring into the pandemic is kind of just meeting myself where I was at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say to myself, one foot in front of the other.
Hmm.
And quite literally, that's it wasn't just that I could do meditation, but that is the thing that I think got me through it without, going off the rails, quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying that when you were nursing your child, that was a time for you to be with yourself and your child?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I was doing that, and then so that was with my first child, and then with my second, oh boy, that was challenging, but it was one foot in front of the other. Her heart is fine now. We got a great surgeon.
Oh, great, great.
Um, but yeah, we were spending literally every waking moment, trying to get food into her so that she would thrive. Um, so that was really difficult, and I know that's certainly not the most difficult thing that a person could go through during a pandemic, right? But it was definitely challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds incredible. Not only being sleep deprived, but having, your own child not being sure if she'll make it. You're not being sure if your child will survive. That's got to be an incredible kind of worry and concern.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we knew she would survive, but um but the doctors were looking at mom and dad, when she wasn't eating. What are you guys doing wrong? And we can't do the surgery until, she's 17 pounds, and she wasn't going past 13. So we found a better surgeon who did it on preemies.
Uh-huh.
Um, so luckily, she didn't need open heart surgery. They were able to do that. Was it laparoscopically? No, I don't know what's the word for it, but
I don't know the terms either.
yeah.
Basically, with going through an artery with the small
Yes,
tool. Uh-huh.
yes. Down, up through the leg.
Right, right.
Um, so we knew she would make it. They said it was actually way worse than they thought, and then they validated that it was not us, that that we were not the problem, and that in itself was stressful,
Right.
when people are looking at you and you're actually spending every moment, trying to get that to work. So
Hmm.
yeah, there were a lot of stressors, and it's so funny that we had decided that, I was going to ask for more help with the second child, which was a learning experience from the first. And then I couldn't because it was pandemic.
Uh-huh.
There was nobody who could come over.
Right.
Um, so yeah, there was a lot. I look back at my past self and I'm like, oh man, good job. You did a
Yeah.
really great job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is sounds very challenging, but I think it's a great success story in that no matter what we're going through, we can either make time to meditate as a specific act or practice, or just look at our very daily life, the things we're doing, as our chance to be mindful.
Yes, exactly. Because sometimes that's all we can do.
Yeah, you know, I can't imagine, with a situation like that, or for a parent who's taking care of their children and working. Not everybody has 30 minutes in the morning and evening, or an hour, or however long to just dedicate to sitting there with themselves. But at the same time, I think if we value meditation as nourishment for ourselves, as essential, kind of as essential as food and sleep, then we can find time no matter how long, and we can also just make it a priority, you know, to do our daily tasks with a bit more attentiveness and mindfulness. I think that was one of the things we wanted to address. Many people ask, well, what if I don't have time?
Mm.
Right? It's like, well, you have time to eat. Even if you don't have half an hour to have your lunch. I have family members who are, trading. That's their profession. They're trading stocks and making investments for other people. There's no lunchtime, right?
Hmm.
I heard that actually in Japan for the stock market, they have lunchtime. It shuts down, which is very humane, I think.
Hmm.
But here, there's no lunchtime, so you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to do lunch and not look at the charts." That could be the end of your career. But is there a way to deal with that situation more mindfully? Can you have you know a shorter lunch, or can you um, um, manage the time better so that whatever you're doing, eating or doing work, that it's a mindful activity, as opposed to kind of shoving food down our throats while we're doing work at the same time. What's the quality of that kind of lunch? What's the quality of that kind of work if we're doing it, with distraction, with a stressful mind?
Yeah, that's so challenging. If that's what's expected of you at work is for you to eat through doing work, when are you supposed to slow down?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the challenge. How do we manage that? Do we just go along with it and like shove food in our face while we work, or maybe there's a way to, for example, I drink this. This is not a paid advertisement, but I drink this stuff called Huel, which is basically a powdered meal for breakfast. It's very nutritious, has plenty of calories and all the macros. You know, Maybe for lunch, if that's our situation, we have no lunchtime, we could still have a mindful sip every couple minutes for an hour, and that's lunch, in a way that it doesn't disrupt our work, and in a way that we also get nutrition, and in a way that we're also, we can relax and be attentive to what's necessary.
So I learned that method, and it was told to me that it's called trigger meditation. Have you heard that?
What's it called?
Trigger meditation. So trigger in a good way. So
Uh-huh.
every time I open a door, I take a breath. And that's the challenge for the day. Or I really like this one. Every time I answer a phone call, take
Mm.
just one deep breath
Mm.
and then answer.
Yeah.
And
So
it
you
sets a nice tone, I think, too.
mm. So it sounds like you're associating that activity, whatever it is, with being mindful, and you end up training yourself many times throughout the day.
Exactly. Setting those great neural pathways. And um, also, again, I'm a neuroscience nerd. So activating the anterior cingulate in the brain, and the more you do it, the stronger it gets,
Mm.
building those, neural pathways,
Mm-hmm.
calming down the nervous system.
Right. Right. The more we do it, the more strength we get from it.
Yeah, I look at it like running a marathon. You just got to keep training because then when you really need it, um, you know, for example, when I really needed it, I don't know that I would have been able to do that if I hadn't been practicing before then. Maybe I could have. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes higher stakes is good. It felt pretty high stakes for me to learn how to meditate when I was very anxious in college.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's like I can choose to do this or I can choose to have this for the rest of my life. Those are my
Right.
choices.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, maybe I could have in that moment. I think desperation can actually be a good thing when it comes to that.
Right. 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 If we're not suffering enough, we may have enough motivation to live a different way, or to train our minds if we're feeling like everything's fine.
Yeah, like the historical Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had to see the suffering first and then he realized
Yeah.
there's going to be
Something's off.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess with that said, there's no excuse to not be mindful or to not make time to meditate if we really value quality of life and value a state of mind that's has a little bit less suffering, a little bit more joy and ease. We value it, you know, we can do it. There's a way, even for the busiest person.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes, setting a time can be helpful, or like we were saying, that the trigger meditation. Um, I find that, writing it down or saying it out loud to someone will make it more likely to happen. I just honestly, I forget,
Mm-hmm.
and so having those other safeguards in place, I think, is important for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I do the same thing. I set my phone to an alarm that has more of a peaceful tone to it, like a soothing bell. And when I hear that bell, it's like, oh, that's different. It's not a phone call, or that's not a notification. And I see the little note that says sitting meditation.
Yeah, I think I have that feature on an app, and I think that could be a good idea to enable it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. There's quite a few apps with that. It's like a repeat bell that can sound multiple times during the day, or however many times you want. I think I think it's necessary for most of us, especially if a person hasn't yet developed the habit or the momentum just yet, because there's so much other information and people, vying for our attention. We may forget about ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, we could have very good intentions, and then it turns out, giving to other people is becomes more the focus, and we forget about ourselves, but we're just as important.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. If we didn't take care of ourselves, then we couldn't help those other people that depend on
Exactly.
us, like our family, our clients, our coworkers. So I guess for the person who says, well, I don't have time to meditate because, people need me. Well, we could also say, yeah, people need you to be healthy, more relaxed, and more at peace in order to serve.
So do the world a favor and meditate.
Right, right. Yeah. What do you find is the most challenging thing as of late to kind of deal
Hmm.
with and be at peace with?
Um, I have two kids, and my youngest is like a tiny little fireball.
Hmm.
She's full of joy and so bright, and loud. And I love being quiet, and I love quiet.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't get a lot of that. And also, one of my pet peeves is repeating myself, especially if it's more than three times.
Hmm. Hmm.
So just little, the little stuff, but the stuff that happens consistently, uh, I have trouble with that. Um, I would say my anger is closer to the surface than it used to be. And at the same time, back when I first started meditation, the anger really went like almost away. But I also didn't have that many obligations.
Hmm. Right.
And it wasn't that I was, hiding anything, but I think maybe I was hiding it from myself, or somehow it was being hidden from me. And now that I'm in a position where I'm constantly being tested on how patient I could possibly be, it's I think it's more like I'm having the tests now, and if I had them back then, I probably would have had a similar, if not worse, result.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so I felt more peaceful back then, but I think that was an illusion.
Hmm. Interesting. So just by back then not having all the responsibilities or challenges, you felt better relatively, or calmer.
Hmm.
But now being challenged more often, sounds like you're aware of the tendency to become angry.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I have to work a lot more with it. And usually it I have to backpedal first and apologize, and then, which I also think is important for kids to see and hear and understand.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a bummer that I have to do that.
Yeah. And that makes me think of mindful communication. Before we were talking about just being mindful, um, learning how to deal with stresses because of how mindfulness can help us, see how we're creating stress for ourselves. But what about when we get to the point where we've already said something or done something maybe harmful or just a little nasty, or we feel we're about to do or say something that could be harmful? Um, how does mindfulness help with communication? This is something like this is something I see less of even in our field. Mindfulness combined with communication.
Hmm.
Um,
I have some ideas as to what that means, but what does that mean to you?
so, for example, um, how to how to apply mindfulness to when I'm feeling a little bit irritable. Um, for example, if it's some sort of interaction with my wife or family members, it seems to be easier to not be mindful and just kind of let something come out, like just say something without even really being conscious of what I'm saying
Mhm.
and be less considerate of their feelings. So I think that's like an example of not being mindful with communication. If I'm just irritable, angry, tired, and hungry, or all of them, and I just
Mhm.
feel like a little toddler, just cranky, I may just, you know, burst out and say something inconsiderate, or to make it more concrete, if someone wants to talk to me, but I'm so tired after the whole day of, doing therapy sessions that the last thing I want to do is talk or listen, and someone wants to talk and they're talking, and I'm already feeling like, oh my God, I can't do this.
Mhm.
And probably, it's showing on my face, and maybe I'll just be, not considerate, walk away, or just sort of ignore them, or just sort of say, uh-huh, uh-huh, and passively go along and listen. I found my habit was that if I kept doing that, if I kept passively listening, just sort of forcing myself to go along with it, I'd actually get more and more irritable, and the person would see that I'm less and less really engaged. And then they may say something like, what's going on? Is what I saying is what I'm saying boring? Am I bothering you? Right? And at that point I'm already bothered. I'm already irritable, and probably the thing that I would say would also be coming from that place of irritation. I may say just, I'm tired. Can we like not talk, or you know,
Mhm.
come
Yeah.
off come off nasty. So I'm still practicing trying to communicate mindfully earlier. If I really am exhausted and feeling a little bit irritable and just too tired to listen, I'm practicing saying, if it's my wife or something, honey, I love you. I'm just so tired. I really want to hear what your story is. I want to hear what you're doing, but at the moment I just can't. And can we chat another time, or maybe after I eat, and just communicate how I feel in a more sensitive way, a more thoughtful way.
Yeah. I think letting them know ahead of time so that they know what to expect is important. Although
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard to do that if we don't realize it
Mhm.
until
Right.
we're in the moment, which I think is where the mindfulness helps you
Mhm.
figure that out earlier.
Exactly. Right.
Which
So
is
I'd say
why I'm
that.
also a fan of backpedaling.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. So can you share an example of backpedaling?
Yeah. Um, so similar situation coming home from a long day of work. Um, walk through the door, trying to set down my stuff, still have my coat on, and my kids come in and tackle me, which is really wonderful and beautiful, but I also have to go to the bathroom, and I'm really thirsty and hungry, and I still have to call one more person.
Right.
you know. People are asking me questions, telling me, what they need from me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Husband walks in, he's requesting, and so I might raise my voice and say, because also in my house it's hard to be heard if you don't speak loudly, which
Uh-huh.
can easily turn into yelling,
Right.
even if you're not mad. Just, listen, you have to hear me.
Right. Right.
Um, and then people get upset, and feelings get hurt. So then I might say, give me a couple of minutes, or I might just give myself a couple of minutes and come back and apologize and say, listen, you know, when you want to talk about this stuff, you got to let me put my stuff down. Um, and I'm sure, I do the same thing to my husband and maybe even to my kids sometimes. And hopefully they can come back and apologize or reset. Um, and like I was saying earlier, I think it's just as important to be able to do that because nobody's perfect. It's
Mm.
okay. It's not the end of the world if we slip up, and we're all trying to figure this stuff out together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like mindfulness allows us to be, more humble and aware of our faults and mistakes, and
Yeah,
able to communicate that and kind of mend the little wounds that we may accidentally create with unmindful speech or behavior.
yeah, and then bringing that information to the next time of maybe texting before I get home saying, "Hey, keep them over there while I get these things done, and then I'll text me what you need ahead of time so I can just think about it." And then just creating those spaces. But, we can't always create the spaces. Sometimes we have to go in blind. And then, so my idea of progress is maybe backpedaling earlier next time or catching myself in the moment. And then maybe eventually I'll be advanced enough to catch myself before it happens
Mm-hmm.
when I'm surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So little victories.
Right. 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 There was some, I forget which teacher was describing one way to assess progress is if we find, anger is one of our challenges. Well, before we practice, we get angry and we're angry for a few days. After we start to practice, we get angry and we're angry for a day. And then a couple hours. And then an hour. And then a few minutes. And then for a moment. And then maybe we catch it even before it shows itself. And so on.
Hmm. Now, how do we do that with patience?
Therapy patients, you mean?
No, patience with a C at the end. I,
Oh, oh,
I
okay. Patience.
that's a whole other probably conversation, but I think it directly relates to anger.
Yeah, yeah, like irritability. The spectrum of irritability. Um, and patience sounds like it's part of that, right?
Yeah.
But what you were saying before, maybe just before we go into the patience piece, and it's all part of it, like mindful communication in the moment, like on the fly, can be one way to apply mindfulness to communication. I think another way is, which you did mention a little bit, is planning together, like communicating with our partners, our family members, whoever, coworkers, whatever the context, but planning and planning in a way that that gives everyone space. Like maybe I'll just give an example. So if we're commonly really tired after work and it just happens to be a certain time every day, it's like when work time is done and as there's the time right after work we're shot. Maybe we can communicate with our partners that usually this time of day is not the time of day where I'm going to be able to engage in conversation, right? Because this is kind of my time to rest a little bit, to quiet down, kind of do my own thing and recover in a way from the workday. And then at this time, I'm all ready. I feel rested. I feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm ready to have conversation and to engage or to do something together. Kind of planning um, and sharing with other people how we feel or how we usually feel in advance so that kind of everyone gets used to each other's patterns and respects each other's space and time. So kind of mindful communication planning.
Yeah, I think that's great when everybody is on board. Um, and I'm wondering what happens when not everybody's on board. How does one, how can one be mindful in the moment when there's an upheaval in a situation or a conversation?
Hmm. So like if everyone's not on board with the plan
Yeah.
and it happens just once, or is it like an ongoing thing?
Mm, well, I'm thinking of uh, like maybe a friend who likes to stir up stuff, or a small child who has, um, outbursts or something like that, or a tricky family member who who causes things to get stirred up. Because I feel like that's a lot of people's realities, and I know some of the methods that I use that I can use successfully, maybe about 20% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
um, I was wondering if you had any, or maybe I could share mine and go from there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hear your examples first, especially
So
with the kids.
yes, well, that one's more challenging. So the one that I use with adults and sometimes with my kids is mindfulness of bodily sensations.
Mm.
So when I start to get angry or upset, usually my face and my ears get really hot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's almost like my thermometer, and it's just the heat is going up.
Mm-hmm.
My hands get really hot, and I focus on those physical sensations rather than the angry thoughts that are kind of going around and around in my head, or maybe I can't think at all. And which is worse in some ways because that's oftentimes when yelling can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so focusing on that and allowing myself to experience those unpleasant sensations, and then focusing on the breath for a moment before I make my next move on what I'm going to say or do.
Mm.
It could be that if I still feel in my body, I know that this is not going to help. If I stay in this room, I might walk out of the room or out of the house, just because that would be the best thing to do.
Mm.
Usually with the caveat that I'll express to them, let me leave the room and come back, right? Because I don't want to think them to think I'm abandoning them.
Mm. Right.
And then I come back when I'm ready. Um, that that can be helpful sometimes with my kids. Um, with my older one, I pretty much work with her like an adult because she's going to be 10. She's very in tune. But with my younger one, she usually matches energy. So if I find a way to calm myself down and sort of even just like get down on like her level and sit down on the floor and just sit there, um, while focusing on my own sensations. If I talk lower, usually she matches, or she might just need to go and do her own thing.
Mm.
And we have a little calming corner for her. She has like a little graph of faces. She points to which one she thinks she feels, and then we have a needs list with pictures, and she points to what she needs.
Mm.
Um, so there's extra tools for her, to help her identify her emotions. But that's the
Right.
therapist in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So there's extra tools involved in that one.
right. But it sounds like your approach of being aware of your bodily sensation and breathing gives you a moment to make a decision on how to respond.
Yes.
Calming calming your emotional state, and also giving you some mental space to choose, should I stay, should I go, and how should I express this to people.
Yeah. And then sometimes taking a breath with my daughter. Um, and then sometimes when I forget, she'll remind me.
Hmm. The young one.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess that's inviting people to participate in that moment of mindful breathing.
Yeah. And um, taking, I wouldn't say the responsibility, taking kind of spreading out the information and the knowledge so that in those moments where I do forget, somebody else can pick it up. It makes it much more likely to be successful. And so I said sometimes she does it. It's not every time, but that helps her. I think it's actually good if I forget sometimes and she remembers, because then she'll remember when she's not with me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great strategy. Sharing your strategy with others so they know what you're doing and that they also can use it themselves.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's important for the listeners to hear, like, this is all best case scenario. I am not like this 100% of the time. Please don't listen and say, well, forget it. My kids would never do that. Well,
Hmm.
I mean, maybe they will a little bit and then maybe do it more later and keep working at it. Even if it works only, 5% of the time, you're planting a seed.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope people remember that as we're talking. And I think we're revealing our humanness in that saying that it doesn't work all the time and sharing our challenges. But for sure, planting a seed and it grows the more we do it. So in the beginning, it may not work too much, but in my experience, the more we do it, the more people practice along with us, things get better. Everyone becomes a bit more mindful and considerate. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you were sharing it, it reminded me of my own strategy of, if in the moment I really feel that my mindfulness is faulting, if that's the right word, faulting,
Sure.
um, that in the past I may not have said anything, but just I may become very quiet. That was my old pattern. If I'm really feeling irritated, if it's turning into an argument, I may start to shut down and be quiet because I had learned that, might as well not say anything harmful and just try to try to resolve the anger or try to resolve the internal problem within myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that, that can be confusing to the other person. So my new strategy is that, yeah, if it's starting to turn into an argument or if people are getting emotional, including myself, that my first step is to relax, which is similar to yours in that in order to relax, I need to be aware of my body's sensation, what's happening. And usually, if I'm getting emotional, there's tension there. And the tension, in a similar way, it builds into like heat. I start to feel heat in my body, heat in my face, get red in the face. I can't see my own face, but it feels like it, you know, if,
Mm-hmm.
if there's that kind of consistent tension in the moment. So my first step is to um, be aware of how I'm sitting or standing, and then release any tension that's there. And I find that immediately with releasing tension and being aware of relaxing, the it's like the emotional energy that was just there starts to diffuse a bit. because, like you said, I'm no longer thinking in a way that's creating that tension. I'm no longer planning like my next attack, for example,
Mm. Yeah.
not planning the next sentence to get back at the person or to defend myself. I'll just relax, release that tension, the emotions start to calm, and then I have space to vocalize what I'm experiencing. Instead of just shutting down and being quiet, I'll say, I'm really feeling irritable right now. I'm afraid I'm going to say something nasty. Um, or even just say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. Um, and then continue the conversation just by verbalizing the feeling. It tends to diffuse it.
I have a friend and he uses this um, phrase with his wife and she uses it with him and it works really well for them. And he says, um, I'm not fit for company. And then if one of them says it, that means they know to leave the other one alone and nobody's hurt or upset about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not fit for company.
I don't use that in my own house. It's not the culture of my household, but um, I'm a little jealous of that one. I think it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great if both people can respect that. Even if we really want to talk about something or address something, to say, I don't know if I could talk about it right now. I feel really irritable, or whatever the phrase is. It gives everyone a bit of space to resolve what they're feeling before communicating.
Yeah, and I think it's important to find your own language around that. Um, the the people in my household, myself included, we're a little bit more direct,
Mm-hmm.
but we all have our ways of stating it. Um, People are often kind of taken aback by how abrupt my husband and I are with each other, but we don't see it that way.
Uh-huh.
So when we say I'm done talking about this, it's not a mean, nasty thing. It's truly I am done
Uh-huh.
talking about this, and we're going to keep going around. So if one of us says that, hopefully, we'll stop, so it doesn't just keep spiraling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sounds like you respect each other's feelings.
We have our moments,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
yes, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, as a strategy, I think that's great for
yeah.
each person, each family, each couple to find their own words that everyone's comfortable with and that can be a sign for either needing to stop communicating or to continue communicating, right? Or to mindfully communicate. Do you find that in your work as a therapist that mindfulness helps you engage with your clients better?
Yeah, it does. I find that the more mindful I am, right? If I had, you know, been meditating more that week, or I'm just experiencing the present moment more, um, I'm able to attune more into people's feelings, and they see that. And I've even gotten comments about it. Um, it it brings something different to the table, not just listening to have a response, which hopefully if you're a therapist, you're not doing. And there are some times when that's appropriate, but really being there with the person, right? Not in my own head, thinking about things in the past or planning for the future, but really being with the person not just for what they're saying, but for what their body is telling us, right?
Mm.
Feeling the emotions of what's happening, but also being mindful enough to not feel them too much, because you can't pull somebody out of a hole if you're down there with them too. So
Mm-hmm.
having that balance. I think mindfulness is a great tool to get to that spot. If you're a helper or a healer or a therapist, and you're like, I don't know how to help these people without also going into despair right with them.
Mm.
I think that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
Mindfulness, I think, could be one of the antidotes.
Right, right. It sounds like the word that's used to describe what you're talking about is compassion fatigue, right? Or empathy
Mhm.
fatigue.
Um, it's interesting. I went through this training recently, and they said that the antidote for burnout, which is what they called it, is actually compassion, which is interesting because they differentiated it from empathy.
Hmm.
And now I've dug my own hole, because now I can't remember exactly how they differentiated them. Um, but compassion, I think, has more of an openness to it, and not so much of a despair, but a wishing for love and happiness, um, and versus empathy, which is just really being in the feels with them, and of course wanting them to be better. So I think that there is a subtle difference, but it's an important difference.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think this is great for discussion because I also have my own ideas and experiences on the difference between compassion and empathy. Or maybe the words are not so important, but the difference in how to relate to clients or just other people in a way that can help them heal, but that also doesn't create suffering for ourselves and lead to that burnout and fatigue.
Yeah. Um, I find that when people are feeling burned out, um, the meditation on loving kindness, sending everybody in on the earth, or even beyond that, love and compassion, and um, you know, positivity. Maybe that's not the right word, but that open, caring compassion. Um, there's an openness to it that I think it's when we're burnt out, we're kind of locked up, we're tense,
Hmm.
um, and like you were saying, releasing the tension can adjust things. And from my perspective, that maybe that's what's going on with compassion versus empathy too. One's kind of a holding in, and then the other one's a releasing out.
Hmm. That's an interesting comparison. Yeah, I can see that because the way I view the difference is where if it's empathy, well, let's use the two words empathy and compassion maybe to distinguish. Uh, Even though compassion, the root of the word actually means to suffer together with someone, right?
Mhm.
My experience of the difference is like that, where if we're trying to understand someone's pain, trying to relate to them, we want them to help them heal. But if we're lacking awareness in ourselves, as we're listening, we're probably getting caught in our own ideas of their pain,
Mm.
imagining what it's like to be, for example, if it's a situation of abuse, domestic abuse, for example, if we're unaware as we're listening, we could start imagining how terribly, scary it is to even be in their home and, the fear and panic they may be feeling day by day and, the fear for their life. if we're not fully aware of ourselves as we're listening, it's as if we can get lost in a dream. And when we're lost in our own thoughts and imagination, it creates almost the same kind of emotional response they're having,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because in the moment, they're in the therapy session, they're not at home, they're just relating a story. If we get lost in our own version of the story, then we do suffer with them. And I don't see that as healthy. Whereas if we're fully mindful of ourselves as we're listening, um, in my own personal experience, I could listen to their story. I can understand it because I know their language. Thoughts come to mind. I can, I have, uh, not that I'm not thinking, the thoughts come to mind of their story. I understand it, but I'm fully aware of what's going on in my own mind so that I'm not lost in it. And it doesn't create all these painful emotions and tension and reaction in myself. So I can be, like you said, just more open, not trying to hold on to any story or feeling, but just be open, be there, listen, and I don't feel affected by their suffering, but I feel that I can understand it deeply, more deeply.
Yeah. And the same training I was referring to before, I learned that, um, and I had heard this before, when you hear a story or when you're watching TV, you are experiencing it as if it were happening to you. So if you're not mindful of that, it can feel like you're right there with them, you know, in that story.
Yeah,
Um, and it's hard to help somebody from there.
yeah, yeah, right. We become caught in the story. We start to suffer ourselves. How can we help if we ourselves are caught?
I have a question kind of piggybacking off of this.
Hmm.
Um, what about if we're talking to some of the healers listening? Um, what about when you're very attached to the outcome of the help that you're giving them? I feel like that contributes to burnout as well.
Hmm. Right. Can you share like a concrete example of what that would be
Sure.
like?
Yeah. So I used to work in Dallas, inpatient substance abuse, and and then it would become outpatient at the end. And even sometimes when people were inpatient, they seemed to be doing so great and amazing. That was my first job right out of my social work program. So when people were doing great, I felt great. And when people were not doing well, I did not feel well.
Hmm.
I personalized it, and I figured out very slowly that um, if I take ownership, even partial ownership of their successes, then that sort of obligates me to take credit for the losses.
Hmm. Right. Right. Which then leads to, highs and lows of and sort of being pushed and pulled by their condition, their perceived successes and failures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since I've pulled back on doing that, and again, I'm not perfect at it, but um, I've had a lot less um, stress with outcomes in general. And in fact, you're taking something away from people when you kind of share in the success. It's really, you give the tools and then they can decide to use them or not.
Mm.
And if they're successful, then that was all them. And if they, fall down, then you're there to help them get back up if that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 It's like focusing on the process of healing rather than getting over focused on results. Sounds like you're just focusing on doing your work of being a helper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a lot less suffering since I've become aware of that.
Yeah. 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 I can relate to that, especially with my work at a clinic for people suffering with psychosis. Most of them had some form of psychosis, and that's for people who don't know what that is. Psychosis refers to when the person has very strange, unrealistic thinking, which prevents them from moving forward with their lives. So just what normal folks or what maybe an average folk would just say is crazy, crazy thoughts, that they believe were being attacked by aliens. Or I had this one client who thought his apartment was a spaceship. Um, what else? Just another typical one, which is interesting, which is some of them believed they were being followed by the government, and that the government was poisoning their breakfast, so that's why they
Mm.
couldn't eat breakfast. Kind of things like this, which there was no evidence for it. I mean, I guess in reality it could be happening to some people, but they had no evidence for it. Chaotic thinking like this, as well as many folks with psychosis may hear voices. Um, they may hear people talking, what they perceive as sort of disembodied people or spirits. Some people see things that nobody else can see. But for the most part, it's hearing voices, having these wild delusions, as well as physiological symptoms of tension or pain or a lot of fear. So these folks were living with that day by day, so much burdened by these thoughts and emotional obstructions that they were afraid to even go out, sometimes afraid to come to the clinic, um, afraid to talk to people. And working with them was a challenge for me first, at some points, because I really wanted them to do better. I really
Mm.
wanted them to be able to heal and be able to work towards their goal. Some of them had a goal of just going to look for work or find a job and maintain it. And some folks were making progress, and I had some clients who did find work and who did experience like a reduction in their fears, a reduction in their sort of unrealistic thinking. They become more insightful, but sometimes it was hard to see them regress. I think, oh man, they were just so close to, going to look for that job, and then something happened, and they'd regress and come back saying, I'm too afraid to do it because I won't be able to do it. And they'd give some reason, because the police were standing outside waiting for me to go there, so I couldn't go apply for the job because the cops were going to get me. Some kind of reason like that. So it became sometimes hard, but I used the same attitude that you just described, which was, hey, I'm just here to do my best to help, to provide tools, and also to show them that I care about them.
Mm.
I felt my role was not necessarily to fix anything, but just to show care for these people who were rejected by most other people as being crazy. Um, and they gave feedback eventually. They shared that they felt really comfortable with me. They weren't afraid. Um, and so that helped me to focus more on the process of just being a helper, being there for them, and um, you know, being okay with their successes and failures.
Sometimes all we need is that validation and knowing that somebody's on our side, that support.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then for the therapist to get some validation as well, it makes everyone feel great about the process.
Mm.
I felt great to hear that, they appreciated me. I was like, wow. And they said they felt supported.
And I think even people who aren't in necessarily even a helping field could benefit from this information. We
Mm.
all have people in our lives that maybe we wish that they could make their life better, and we might get really invested and frustrated when things keep going the wrong way.
Right.
And we got to be careful not to place blame or get too angry, because it's not really going to help unless they're asking for help, in which case that's different.
Right. So it sounds like where patience comes in, huh?
Yeah. And then when they ask for help or ask for something, I heard of this really cool concept called thankless giving. I
Mm.
really think that should be a holiday, actually, where you where you give somebody something. It could be money or advice with no expectation. I mean, they could throw the gift away right in front of you, and you would be just as willing and happy to give it to them. And so when I'm in the right mind state, um, I like to try and do that. With my group of friends, most of them are Buddhists, so they have similar mindsets. Um, when we give each other gifts, usually we say it's okay if you regift it, because we don't want it to go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's thankless giving, or giving the homeless person a few dollars. They choose what they do with it.
Mm.
You could say, well, don't use this on drugs. They're going to use it on whatever they use it on, and that is their choice. So it's, if you're not okay with that, then don't give. You
Mm.
know, that's everybody has their own free will, and sometimes letting go. People are going to make choices, and I don't know if I want to say that's okay, but I guess it has to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thankless giving is giving without the expectation that the person will do what you want.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about all these different benefits of mindfulness and strategies, in daily life in terms of communication. But I think for most people, the mindful sitting or sitting meditation practice is really important, because if we don't start with that, it can be really difficult to just be mindful in daily life,
Mm.
just saying, "Oh, I'm just going to be more mindful from now on." But sitting meditation is this practice where we stop everything, put everything down, we stop moving, we stop looking around, we stop trying to reach for things with our body and mind, and just sit with ourselves, become aware of what's happening within our body and mind. Um, but I think for some people, this just starting this practice of meditation can be a challenge. Um, what could you say to the folks who, to them, like all this sounds great, but they're not sure how to start, and They may even feel that, I just can't meditate. How do I start if I'm a person who just I can't meditate, my mind is too wild? What would uh, what would you say to them to encourage them?
Because sometimes my mind is too wild too. Um, and so in those moments, or even those weeks, or in some cases years, where my mind just bounces around, do the best that you can. I tend to like to do mindfulness meditation by sitting and focusing on my breath, but really it's not possible sometimes. My mind gets so busy.
Mm.
So there are certain apps that you can use. One is, it sounds very obvious, but it's very easily forgettable. So write this down for anybody who's interested. It's called the breathing app.
Huh.
And it actually makes, there's like this little ball where if you look at it, it gets bigger. And as it gets bigger, it's like a balloon. You breathe in. And as it gets smaller, you breathe out. And you could also turn on the sound. So there's one sound for breathing in and one sound for breathing out. And if you're really just unable to focus, it's you're engaging in your senses in more than one way. So, yes, physically, you're focusing on the breath. Visually, you're looking at the ball. And with your ears, you're hearing the music.
Mm.
So, anchoring in more than one sense for me, I think is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Guided meditations, to me, is less mindful, right? Because you're not using your own mind as much. You're again anchoring in somebody's voice. But I think that's really important to do, to know about yourself. Okay, right now I just can't do it on my own. That's okay. Um, Going to retreats, if you have the ability, the time, um, to do that, that helps settle the mind down. Although in my experience, um, the ones that are 3 days or longer are better, but even 1 day retreats can help calm down the mind somewhat. Um, 3 day retreats kind of drive me a little bit nuts, because by the third day comes, I'm like, oh, I'm getting into it, and then I have to
Mm-hmm.
go.
Right. Right.
But that's my reality right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then really just reading Thich Nhat Hanh. When I listen to his books, and really I recommend any book by him,
Mm.
especially for beginners, but really anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not usually the one speaking because English was not his first language. So Thich Nhat Hanh, for people who might be interested, it's ThichNhatHanh.
Mm-hmm.
And just by listening to the narrator speak the words that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, I just become more mindful listening to it, because he says things like, as I take one step, I am here. As I take my next step, I have arrived. And it's just rhythmic and calming. And it's almost like if you could entertain this, like a more passive way of becoming more mindful.
Mm. So those are audiobooks or those guided meditations?
So Thich Nhat Hanh, I have only found the audiobooks, um, but I'm sure the guided meditations must exist somewhere. Um, but I haven't found them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I can put a link in the description of this video to him and his books resources. I
Okay.
also find his teachings on mindfulness to be so simple but so powerful. And the way he speaks, I can feel that it's his lived experience. Um, I also find a lot of benefit from reading his teachings. But those few tips that you gave were great. So the first one was, if it's really hard to sit alone, to use an app, or look for this app you mentioned, but to have some external tool that can help anchor us
Mm.
with the practice is one thing. The other thing you mentioned was community. So joining some form of community meditation where the whole environment is designed around being mindful and there's people there doing it together. I've also experienced either being a participant or a retreat leader, that's so powerful to have a group being mindful together. And then, of course, the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. There are other great teachers out there. Maybe I could put a few other links in the description to these resources. Listening and reading as a way to learn and find inspiration, to stick with the practice. I think those are great tips.
I know that they've helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I could add something on to that, which would be, if we feel that it's really hard and we can't meditate, I'd say, yeah, that's why we do it,
Mm.
because we're not good at it, because our mind is so used to being distracted, so used to being uh, mindless or much less aware, that that's why we do it. And it's normal. It's normal to experience being distracted. It's normal to spend, especially in the beginning, to spend half, 80% of the time in distraction, maybe 20%, maybe only 10% of the time being mindful. That's normal. And so I hope people don't feel discouraged when they start out. Um, it's almost like anything, right? Even learning an instrument. You just pick up an instrument, who can play it all of a sudden? It takes a while to even learn how to press down on a guitar fretboard, to press down on a string, to even make a sound, let alone being able to play fluidly, right?
Yeah.
So I'd add just that piece of, it's normal to feel uncomfortable and uh, very distracted and scattered. But the more we do it, the more we find the right method that works for us, the more we find that we're more and more mindful, more and more calm, which leads to a a mindful, wise way of being, where we can more easily apply all these other techniques and strategies that we talked about to find a very fulfilling life. So I don't know if that was a good conclusion. I think our time is about up, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Thank you for coming on. This was an awesome discussion. I think it was nourishing for me to hear your experience and to chat. Hopefully it was nourishing for the folks who listen in.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Same here, Deirdre.